Good evening. Good to have all of you here. Aloha. I'm Reverend Tim Lytle. I'm the senior minister here at Unity Church of Hawaii. So we welcome you here. There are restrooms right down the steps. Women's is on the left, men's is on the right. And if you need help with anything, please let me know or let any one of us know. I first want to acknowledge, and I'm aware of this every day, that the land where we are, the Aina, is very, very sacred land, and we give thanks for this land. We give thanks for the first peoples, the indigenous people of Hawaii. We give thanks for all of those ancestors. We give thanks for all of our ancestors that have led us to this point. And we give thanks for this time, this space. We recognize that the land on which we are is really not ours. And we recognize the source from which it comes and the Hawaiian people and the Hawaiian culture. And we acknowledge all of you. We have wonderful panelists up here who will be introduced. And Tadia Rice will be our moderator. Yeah, give it up for Tadia, who organized this event. And I don't know if there's still snacks afterwards or not, but I hope you got some of the snacks. We had some refreshments down here. I don't know. There may be still some down there. All right, okay. And I also want to welcome you to this place that's a very welcoming, safe, and sacred space. Unity, while being based on the life and teachings of Jesus, draws also from universal spiritual principles from around the world that are all in alignment with one another. And Unity believes that we are all one. We're all one family. That we are better because you are here. We're better because you're here. We're better because you are here. That all of us have something to contribute. And so tonight we are gathering at the table. Now they have tables, literally, but we're all gathering at the table to learn from one another about generational trauma. Many groups here have experienced generational trauma, and we'll be learning and talking more about that in ways of approaching that and experiencing some healing with that. And this last Sunday, I talked about moving from trauma to transformation and triumph. So I hope that as we look at this whole experience of trauma, that we learn, we grow, we stay open, we are in heart coherence, and we want to welcome our live streamers. We're live streaming this tonight, and it will be archived on YouTube and Facebook, Unity Church of Hawaii. So you can send that link or send that information to others if you'd like them to see this. I advertised this also with Pacific Health Ministries. In addition to being senior minister here, I'm also a chaplain with Pacific Health Ministries. And so we have numerous chaplains who are watching or who may come in person because we want to learn more about generational trauma. Thank you for being here. We bless you. We recognize the presence that you are. We recognize the light that you are. Thank you for being you. I will now turn this over to Dr. Cynthia Lynch, who will say something and then introduce Tadia Rice, our moderator. everything in the light.
Mahalo, thank you all for being here tonight. My name is Dr. Cynthia Lynch. In my day job, I'm a professor at HPU. But I also serve as the president of the Interfaith Alliance Hawaii. And as the Interfaith Alliance Hawaii, our mission is to be a healing voice in Hawaii, to bring faith traditions together, to dialogue, to bring civic unity and respect to one another. And so from time to time, we host these events. We are looking forward to hosting about 5 of them next year in association with other faith traditions on various topics that are meaningful to our spiritual lives, but also our civic lives. As we live in turbulent times, we need to find ways of navigating. Our ancestors found ways of navigating to come here and to survive and to thrive, and so that's what we will do also. So I want to remind everyone to please turn your cell phones off, and I will give a warm welcome to Tadia Rice, who is our moderator this evening.
Thank you, Cynthia. We're all being very cognizant of the steps. I'm famous for falling down them. I would like to open the evening with great gratitude for having you here with us. It's very special when we do come together, especially because we are varied faith traditions, maybe no faith tradition, maybe multiple faith traditions. It's okay, and it's really lovely. And what I'd like to do, let me set these down for a moment. Before I introduce our speakers, I want to just ask you a few questions so that I can put the evening in context. I'm wondering how many of you feel you have experienced generational trauma. You don't have to answer unless you really want to, but if you feel you have, please raise your hand. I think everyone probably would answer yes to that. And do you find yourself reliving that generational trauma from time to time? Do you find yourself triggered by certain things that happen that remind you of the trauma you experienced that has stayed with you? Do you often feel on guard, paranoid, on watch, vigilant? Do you feel numb or detached from people or activities at times? Have you noticed a significant change in your interest in important activities? Are you irritable or have episodes of outbursts? Have you been feeling more sad or depressed than usual? I have. Last week put me over the edge. Do you feel that you are unable to remember important parts of historic events? And do you feel like somehow your future might be cut short? These are all symptoms of generational trauma. And it's very important that we address them. The good news is you can heal. You can heal generational trauma. You don't have to keep it. It doesn't have to be yours. I'm going to go through very, very quickly a PowerPoint presentation, very briefly. Yes, that would be lovely. Thank you. I would appreciate that because I can't get, yes, but not yet. Not yet, Tim. Not yet. Sorry, we're winging some of this. Generational trauma is something that we want to understand. Let's see if we can get the PowerPoint going. Oh, where I can't see it. Okay, let's see. We need to go to the first slide, Sean. What is generational trauma? Very quickly, generational trauma is a very brief explanation. There it is. That's it. The impact. I'll let you do the reading. I won't read it to you. but this is what it is. The reason you need to know what it is so you can do something about it. Next slide. Oh, I've got the thing. What's wrong with me? Sorry. There is intergenerational trauma as well as generational trauma. So do any of you know if your grandparents went through the Holocaust? Or if your great-grandparent was enslaved in America? Or if somehow you had forefathers who were colonized, maybe lost their lives? Stories get passed down, and we take those stories, and they stay scientifically in our DNA. And once your DNA is altered, every descendant after you will have that marker in your DNA. There's evidence of generational trauma. There's codependency, hypervigilance. I don't know where my slides are going. Sorry, folks, very sorry. This isn't what I'm seeing, but that's okay. Evidence of generational trauma, codependency, difficulty trusting others, mental health conditions. We know by the level of homeless people on our streets that mental health is a big issue, and it all ties usually to childhood. That is generational trauma. Drug use, alcohol fetal syndrome, unhealthy attachments. I'm sorry, I can't really see the screen from here. Okay, let's see if I see this one. Here's the symptoms. Take a look at these symptoms. If you have any, raise your hand. Any one of these symptoms, any two. Hands are up. We all have these symptoms. These are examples. Anyone who has forefathers and mothers who were enslaved anywhere in the world, Holocaust survivors, genocide survivors. All around the world, these historical events have occurred, and they haven't gone unnoticed in the children of these people who suffered so much, and even the children's children of those people who suffered so much. Mental issues, again, we talked about that. We're all very familiar with these, and if you know anyone who is on the streets, you know that they suffer from all of these. So we're going to talk about how to heal from generational trauma. Let me move on because something's not working here. Thank you. At this time, I do want to introduce you to our panelists, and if you don't mind if I sit, I would be very grateful. I want to tell you first about Meleanna Aululi Meyer. Tim? Would you stand while I introduce you? This is someone very, very special. Meleanna is a deeply respected and long-standing activist, artist, educator, learner, seeker of beauty, healing, and wonder. Her passion has always been about exploring and living the arts in all forms. Meleanna is a Salzburg Global Fellow and a fellow also of the East-West Center and the Asian Pacific American Leadership Institute. She says that it's the cultural contributions from diverse experiences that have enriched her life. Meleanna says that multiple perspectives on the world has helped her learn Ike Makawulu, and she'll talk a little bit about that. It's a Hawaiian knowledge that means how to see, how to feel, how to learn, how to recognize, how to perceive, experience, be aware, and understand. And she has done that through her remarkable, unique art. Meleanna is a true creative problem solver with an insatiable curiosity. And we are thrilled, TIA, the Interfaith Alliance of Hawaii, is thrilled that she has recently joined our board as one of our members, and we welcome her. She's a remarkable, remarkable person. If any of you know the Meyer sisters, you know that she comes from a line of Native Hawaiians who have always been remarkable and are historic. Her ohana has centered around community healing and building through arts and education by creating opportunities for empowerment and excellence. Meleanna is also a filmmaker, a muralist, and ideator who welcomes challenges and paradoxes in the hopes that together, kako, a Hawaiian word that means all of us, we will find answers to the world. After Meleanna speaks, our second panelist will be Warden Estela Derr, who's now, well, Professor Estela Derr. I know this glamorous-looking woman, born and raised on Kauai, is very deceptive to look at because she was a nearly 30-year prison warden. Her career was wearing, what do you call that you put on me that day? The SWAT suits. I actually got to put one on. It's so heavy, and her gun, and her baton, and her radios, and her keys, through the Federal Bureau of Prisons. And she's been right here in Hawaii and Honolulu, and also 3 other states where she served. She retired just this year after an amazing and successful career where she witnessed riots, staff assaults, suicides, murders, hunger strikes, and baby deliveries. That pretty woman right there handled it all. She demonstrates amazing resilience and an amazing faith over fear. I've been to the Federal Detention Center. I've met her staff. I've seen the inmates, and I've seen how they respect her. She walks through the halls, and everyone respects her. It's quite unusual. She says her career was built on the backs of her parents and family and people who believed in her. Now that she's retired, not really, she's lecturing about criminology and criminal justice at Chaminade University as well as Hawaii Pacific University. And she's mentoring the next generation of leaders in corrections. Estela is one of the most inspiring people I know, and she is also a board member of the Interfaith Alliance of Hawaii. Please welcome her. There is so much to say about our next guest panelist, Dr. Kathryn Takara. I could write a book just introducing her. She is a pioneer performance poet and activist. She's also the founder and CEO of Pacific Raven Press, where she is engaged in national projects and publications. She taught and developed Black Studies in the Ethnic Studies Department at the University of Hawaii, and later transferred to interdisciplinary studies, where she continued to develop new courses, including Africana studies. Dr. Takara is the author of 11 books of poetry and has published over 400 poems in literary journals and numerous academic articles. She is the winner of the BCF 2010 American Book Award. She continues to write, and she publishes over 20 other writers. She remains a traveling performance poet in demand, and she often visits China and West Africa.
I turned it off. What's happening?
Turn off your phone.
I turned it off.
See, I will embarrass you. I will call you out. Okay. So she just returned from West Africa last year. I want you to know Dr. Takara is also the recipient of the University of Hawaii Board of Regents Outstanding Teacher Award. And she is a 2-time Fulbright Scholar, Fellow. She is a Dame Knight in the Orthodox Order of St. John Russian Grand Priory. She has received the NAACP Lifetime Achievement Award in Education and African American History and Culture. And in 2019, she was distinguished as one of America's history makers. Please welcome Dr. Takara. Last but not least, we got a man. José Barzola, who I love like a son. He is one of the Interfaith Alliance's advisors, and we so appreciate him. Many of you may know him. He is a conflict and peace specialist in the Office of the Provost at University of Hawaii, Manoa. And within that university community, José coaches people in conflict, students in conflict. He coaches conflict with educators. He's a mediator, a facilitator. He gathers information. He's an active listener for students to voice their concerns. Believe it or not, he has been in higher education and a higher education administrator with over 20 years of experience and success in academic administration, but he does not look like he is old enough to have that. And he has been active in the Matsunaga Institute, Seeds of Peace, Conflict Resolution Alliance, the Institute for Climate and Peace, Hiroshima Atomic Bomb Museum, the Nagasaki Foundation for the Promotion of Peace, the Pacific Asian Affairs Council, and several others, where he organizes and facilitates community dialogues around the topics of diversity, inclusion, social justice, equity, migration issues, and peace building. As an immigrant to the United States himself, José brings a unique perspective that is critically relevant, especially during our current polarized political climate. Please welcome José Barzola. Now, I will tell you, I gave each panelist the same 3 questions to answer. So in their commentary, they're going to answer each of those questions from their own perspectives and research. So I take it, I'm getting off the mic now and turning it over to Meleanna. Meyer, thank you so much. Mahalo.
Aloha mai kākou. I just wanted to welcome you all and offer an oli, because that's what we do. This is an oli that has to do with the gladness that I have seeing you all. And it's, I have a wonderful teacher, his name is Keola Lake, and Kumu passed years ago, but our halau still meets, and I'm honored to be here. This is the season of, do you know this is the season of Lono? We have 2 seasons in Hawaii. We have Kauwela, which is summer, and Ho'oilo, which is our winter or our wet season. So these offerings here were brought by my dear friend and colleague Vernon Viernes, and this represents so much of what tonight is all about, which is the fruits of the land, our limukala, our pa'akai, our olena, our ulu, and it's all symbolic and representational, and our ava and our sacred waters. There are prayers up here afterwards that you're free to take as well from my dear sister Miley's shop at Native Books. So let me offer this oli for you. O nauni ka halame ka lehua, e hale lehua no hia na ka noi. O ka uno nia e alo ine e lia ne ho io. Tai hiti mai ti puno o hiti pu me ke alo. Ha, aloha e, aloha e, aloha e. Mahalo. I'm pleased to be here for so many reasons. I'm here because of Pilina. Pilina for Hawaiians is a very important concept. It has to do with relationships. It has to do with knowing and friendship and trust. So tonight is important for me because I am an educator, most importantly, and an artist, but my work in community has to do with not only healing, but with empowering and giving our students and our community members agency, or letting them feel that they are supported in the work that they are doing. So Tagore is one of my favorites, and I'm going to share a quote that, that I love. And this is Rabindranath, the poet himself. I slept and dreamt that life was joy. I awoke and saw that life was service. I acted and behold, service was joy. So I was raised like that in a family that was very Montessori, actually. And I have to say, believe it or not, I have a 45-year-old son, and he actually came to Unity years ago when I returned to Honolulu. And so I actually have a fondness for this place and the kindness that they've offered to our family. This is important for you to know because community works like that. And I think over here is, not yet, is going to be
Sean, could you please
a mural that you'll see.
put up the mural?
And the reason I'm going to be showing that is because Tadia, in the meantime, is going to remind me of the questions. But I wanted to bring this book. And see, I get to bring books because I'm a teacher, so these are some of my props. This is an important book because my grandfather signed it when he was 17 years old. This is the Ku'e petition. 38,000 Hawaiians signed this document against annexation. And you need to know that we are indeed living in the 50th state, but also in an occupied country that continues to be occupied. And this book is proof of an annexation that never happened. And I will pass this book around because it's so beautiful, because you'll have a sense of what our ancestors said no to. We said no to this annexation that was imposed on the people of Hawaii. And you know, I was very touched yesterday. A very dear friend of mine at church said to me, "Thank you for letting us be here." And you know, that isn't for me to offer or to, I honored her mana'o, but what I learned from her was that she just had gratitude in her heart for being in a beautiful place like Hawaii. And I honor and respect the truth that she is able to understand. And don't mind me, I was one of those ADHD kids who couldn't sit. So for me, walking around is a good thing. I also want to share that for the work I do, this is the secret ingredient, or one of them anyway, is to find out your history. Because believe it or not, I did not know, I was not taught my history. My second language is French. I did not grow up speaking Hawaiian, nor did my mother. She did not speak Chinese either. But I can tell you what's important for you all to know is that the work each of us does matters. So I'm here to remind you of that. I'm also here to remind you that creativity is the key to problem solving, to doing the good work that we need to do. This is a mural. It's a double-sided mural, and it's really a lot more beautiful in person. But I wanted to share this with you tonight because it answers this notion of generational healing for me. Because as an artist, what can I do? I can give the talents and the creativity that I have to others so that hopefully they can heal as well. So that is what I want to offer to you tonight, and let you know that this mural is at St. Clement's right now, and it was in, another church, the Methodist Church has just picked it up and it will tour with the Methodists. But what's exciting about this is it's really beautiful in person. It's 6 feet by 20 feet, so it's very large. And I had the privilege of working with my dear friend, Ed, right here, Young. So he and I went to the Parliament of World Religions with my Baha'i friends. And we had a blast, okay? We got to bring Hawaii to that, and Cynthia as well, and a group of us. So this is our sharing from the islands. This was part of our sharing. This is a mo'olelo of thoughts and stories about Ike Hawaii. And on the other side of this mural, by the way, it was created by 6 of us. I don't do any work by myself because that just doesn't make any sense to me. And it's important that you know that, because what we're trying to do is build community. And in that building, this is the privilege that I have. So I just want to share this with you. Historical and cultural trauma looks like this for 6 artists. And I wish it were a lighter, because the colors are a little off, but that's my slide. But to see this today, I worked with my beloved friend Vernon this morning with his staff and organization. They help in our community. There's so much need. In the Native Hawaiian community, all of these impacts are felt very heavily because there is such a loss of not only the language, but health disparities, higher rates of chronic disease, and that impact in terms of generational trauma is really problematic, because we have limited access, not only to health care, but a deep distrust. As many who have had issues with the United States and its historical abuses and things, we do have a great distrust in not only the medical fields, but in education and in the prison systems. So my dear sister here will share with that as well. But the impact of this dispossession is really what I would like to also share. It's an issue that is compounded by low socioeconomic status and lack of access to available services. So I was a lucky one. My grandfather graduated from Yale in 1904. And so from high school at 17 at St. Louis, off he went because someone saw that he had promise. So off he went to Michigan and then Yale. So in our family, although I never met him, it wasn't if you were going to college, it was where and when. Education always played a really important role in our family. And because of that, you know, I've got 6 siblings. We all got educated. So that's just the way that went. I find that that's a gift and a privilege, and with that privilege comes a great deal of responsibility. And you all know that everyone has opportunity and gifts to offer, but for me, that was a very big charge in terms of how I grew up. And let me just read this, because this is Aina Aloha, and Aina really does not just mean land. Land is the most literal meaning of Aina. The most important thing for you all to know, which is about healing, is that Aina actually means I, that which feeds you, na, Aina. So if you think about that, then you understand why for Hawaiians, in terms of healing, the land is so important. And so this is also work that I do to try to make a difference in our communities. So I've worked in the shelters, the prisons, with organizations all around Hawaii. So this indeed is my passion. So let me just read to you from this flyer about the mural. Complications and paradox, hypocrisy and denial all plague those involved in the story of Hawaii and its history. Having become more than a painting, the mural has become an invitation and an offering to the community, an earnest attempt to explore historical trauma, loss, theft, horror, and silencing, loss from deaths of loved ones and from the restriction of cultural practices, horror at the wholesale devaluing of a people's way of life and the silencing that went along with the banning of language. I just want you for a moment to imagine that tomorrow you're going to be asked to speak Swedish. Swedish, what a beautiful language. Talade ni svenska? Nej? Yeah, okay, good. That's the only sentence I know, because I didn't want to study French and I just picked a tape out of the tape lab and it was Swedish. So that's the only Swedish I know. But for Hawaiians, could you imagine what a traumatic experience that must have been? Not understanding not only the language, but the rules, everything that was changed. So for me, it was also a genocidal experience because it was a population collapse. 80%, upwards of 90% of the population gave up its spirit, so to speak, through disease, through pestilence. So for me, our family does this work because I think that's what my mom wanted us all to do. My dad, I don't know about my dad, he was a great guy, but he was a hard worker, but my mom really played deeply into our work in community. So I just want you to know that we end up healing generational trauma by doing the work. So that's my message to you all now, that each of us has talents and skill sets that we just need to apply. And I just wanted to thank you, because I know it's a short time and I'm just going to pass this mic, but there's so much more to do for each of us. I brought all these books just to show you, once you find out your history, you will never go back. And then what you will be doing is looking for the truth. And we call that Oya I'o. And I'o happens to be God, Spirit. So we are looking to the essence and the absolute righteousness of the truth. So on that note, I just want to thank you all very much for this opportunity. And I'm going to pass the mic.
Don't pass it quite yet.
Yes.
I just want this audience to know that the woman who stands before you comes from a long line of very special wahine. Would you please share who your ancestor was?
Well, she was a confidant of the Queen. Her name was Aima Nawahi and Joseph. So they were royalists, and she garnered all of these petitions. She and Kwahilani Campbell, they went, and they sent their people out to, and this was before computers, before cars, before telephones, before anything. So the fact that there are 38,000 names on that book that's going around is a testament to the love Hawaiians had for their country. And that is to continue to be, yes, I mean, she was a confidant of the Queen's. So it's a privilege of mine to be doing the work and continuing the work, and I thank you very much.
Well, thank you. My name is Estela. I'm going to sit. But thank you for that dynamic introduction. Yeah, healing, when you learn who you are, you do heal. And thank you, Tadia, for inviting me to be part of such a esteemed panel up here. How did I get up here? Well, it was a question over lunch, right? I believe. But basically, when the question was posed, can you speak about Filipino women and generational trauma? I'm like, well, yeah, I'm atypical of that. A little plantation girl from Kauai, born and raised, who suddenly became a warden at a federal detention center, because stereotypically, what do wardens look like? Anybody? Tall white male, right? No, you got a short Filipina girl. But my name again is Estela, and I'm the oldest daughter of first-generation American immigrants from the Philippines. My parents' story started in the 1960s, where my dad became naturalized via the U.S. Army draft, and my mother later becoming naturalized in the 1970s. I was born and raised on a plantation on Kauai, in Makaweli. So there, my brother and I learned the values of kapwa, or a shared community and Filipino humanity, and bayanihan, where the community comes together to share in chores and basically living. It takes a village, right, to raise children. So that's the lifestyle my brother and I grew up with, which we thought was normal. My parents were able to navigate through the American maze, working in the sugar plantation, my dad did, and my mother worked multiple jobs as a housekeeper with the hotels and also a janitor in several little banks on Kauai. So, you know, with the economy, they took whatever jobs they could do to help show or build a better life for their children and for their families back home, because for most Filipinos that immigrated to the United States, basically their work is also for their families back home. So their Filipino cultural values were sacrifice, resilience, and silence. And that's basically what shaped my life and career. As children, that's what we knew. These values taught me to prioritize my own needs, my family's needs over my own needs growing up. Family always came first, and sometimes it was at a cost of my own emotional well-being. For us, TV was a great teacher, right? For kids, we come home, we watch, we sit in front of the TV, and you see this typical American family, and they're talking, they're hugging, they're showing emotions that for us as children, we never really experienced. So something as simple as a hug was not known. I love yous were not freely given. But what we later learned when we grew up, or at least when I grew up, was, you know, my parents couldn't give what they never received. So that was a hard truth for me to understand. And breaking that cycle with my daughter, I made sure she got the hugs and the I love yous and the constant chats, sometimes more than she needed. But, you know, as a bicultural, when you think of, when I was looking at different excerpts online, bicultural Filipino, you know, American with Filipino influence. I say I was a tricultural, atypical American Filipina, because I also had to navigate Hawaiian culture living in Hawaii. It was way different. It wasn't on TV either. So just kind of navigating that and learning that since the age of 10. And now I'm 58, I'm still learning and still trying to figure it out. Thank you, Tadia, for helping open my eyes on this. But Filipino women tend to get stereotyped. They get put in a box as submissive or even as mail order brides. I experienced that firsthand in Pennsylvania, believe it or not, because my husband was a military man. So that was an interesting introduction for me that racism exists or stereotypes exist. And anybody that wasn't white was pretty much brought over to the United States to become naturalized or be part of American citizen. Until I opened my mouth when I was asked, did I like being in the United States? And I said, yeah, I like it very fine. I'm a graduate also from Chaminade University. So just navigating through all of this, mental health was not typical. Seeking help for mental health issues was not something natural for the family. In fact, it brought shame or hia. So through hia and pakikisama, or enduring things in silence, is what we learned. You suffered in silence. So things, you know, my brother and I were learning the American way, Hawaiian culture. Dr. Asuncion, a Filipino psychologist, kind of beautifully put it together and said, healing requires embracing both our cultural traditions and the deeper practice of kapwa, which is defined as the understanding that our shared humanity and the trauma we've inherited. So we have to kind of come to terms to that. Like you said, learn a little bit about yourself. And she also cites Dr. Kovar's metaphor of the Filipino jar or banga. We're like a jar. And we're deeply rooted, and our emotions are tied into our core or our loob. So the sacrifice, silence, and resilience that my parents taught me as a child is part of my core. It's not a weakness, it's my source of strength, and it's also the way I embrace who I am. So resilience and adaptation are also how we keep things polite, careful, and distant, allowing us to function in social spaces without exposing our deeper selves. So we hold a little bit of ourselves. We're not very open. And it's something that obviously I had to learn, because my job, I can't be in a little shell As the warden, I don't, you know, you'd have to be assertive. And learning all that was something that, you know, I had to kind of make as part of me. So embracing vulnerability takes courage, and in helping us find that balance, creating space to honor our full selves and foster deeper relationships leading to connection and healing. Now, with insights such as Dr. Kovar's and Dr. Asuncian's work and platforms like this, we can create space for healing. And thank you for inviting us into this safe space for healing, and for allowing me to speak about this, because I would never have really put it into context what my parents went through and what I went through and still going through in learning and accepting who I am, fully accepting who I am. And I like to end with a quote from José Rizal. You and I got quotes going on. I love quotes. Anyway, who was a Filipino nationalist and a hero. He said, "A person who does not remember where he came from will never reach his destination." So thank God I learned where I came from, or I wouldn't have reached this beautiful back home, came back home to speak to all of you. So it is with immense gratitude that I stand proudly on the shoulders of my immigrant parents and all those who paved the road for us. Maraming salamat po. Magandang gabi. Thank you and have a great evening.
Hi, I'm Kathryn Takara, and I think my story, I think I'll tell you a story, is a struggle. I was initially perplexed a little bit at this topic, generational trauma, and the more I thought about it, the more it fully engaged me as I remembered not only growing up in Alabama in Jim Crow, and there was violence and some things that I'm not even going to speak about today, but I thought that I would address my talk in terms of the generational trauma of the women of our family. And let me just say, as has been said by the two other women speakers, that our history, our language, our culture was pretty much destroyed in the slave trade. The history that there was ever anything dignified about pre-slavery was not available. And so I was blessed to come up in a university town, and so there was a sense of some Black history. But there was a shame of Africa because of how Africa was portrayed as a savage place, no dignity, disjointed from Egypt and all of this kind of thing. And so there was always this tug of identity as to who I was. But let me go back. So I'm going to start only on my mother's side, because that is where I think more trauma is. Although on my father's side, there was Native American Cherokee, and that's trauma, but I'm not going to deal with that. So on my mother's side, there were two plantations in South Carolina. There was the Young Plantation, and there was the Chappelle Plantation. And of course, the Chappelle Plantation was French. And interestingly enough, my mother became a French professor, and I did too for a while. So it's just funny how those things, without knowing at the time anything about the plantations or ancestry or anything like that. And so somehow or another they got together because the plantation owners were having a ball, and the servants, and they were house servants or house slaves, and the house slave was usually a light-skinned Black person or a light-skinned mixed person. And there were more favorable living conditions for the house slave, and there was a closer relationship with the master, and so that accounted for a lot of the light-skinned descendants, but marriage was illegal, so everyone was just like in sin, if you will. And so they came together, and then the slave owner moved to Lowndes County, Alabama, and set up a new plantation. And what was interesting was, years later, generations later, my cousin, Sammy Young Jr., or the fourth or the third or whatever, got involved in the civil rights movement, voter registration in Lowndes County, Alabama, and he was later shot in the back of the head and killed for trying to go into a white bathroom. But I'm not going on that part of the story. I'm just letting you know that there's been a lot of trauma. So, oh, and the man was let off free one night in jail. So, all these light-skinned women on my mother's side got educated because the son of the slave owner who had these sisters bought them a property in Birmingham, outside of Birmingham, and a house, and they were able to become teachers. So we have a long history of teaching on that side of the family. But there's so many stories, so much trauma. So there was a cook, and there was a field hand. And the cook was light-skinned, and the field hand was dark-skinned, and they had kind of a thing. But the master, the owner of the home, son, wanted and was having relations forced with the cook. And so her boyfriend killed the guy that was the son. And he fled from Louisiana, that's where they were at the time, to Alabama. And then another similar story happened where his best friend's wife was being put upon by a white man in Alabama, and they killed him. So then the family fled to Cleveland. And in Cleveland, my grandmother, Maud, that was such a long and complicated story. But anyway, my grandmother, Maud, for her second husband, because her first husband died in Tuskegee. Why? Actually, he died in Pittsburgh. Because he was educated as a chemist, and he couldn't get a job as a chemist. And so Maud, my grandmother, was very ambitious, and she said that he should go north and get a job. This was about 1918, 17, like that. And so he went, the family went, and he got that 1919 flu or whatever that deadly thing was, and died. And the family blamed her and took my mother and my uncle and the brother away from Maud and decided they would raise them in Tuskegee. Now, all of this is very traumatic. So my mother, who was brilliant, always felt, number one, abandoned. Why? Because her mother, Maud, in Cleveland, had a dalliance, is that a word, a dalliance, with her husband, who had a boarding house, and he was also a postman. And she broke it off, and he slit her throat. This is my grandmother, my immediate grandmother, on my mother's side. So my mother was left with her father dead in Pittsburgh from the pneumonia or whatever that thing was. And then her mother with the slit throat, who had already been, she had been taken away from her mother because her mother was a bad woman because she had been responsible for the death of their favorite son in Tuskegee. So anyway, so it goes on and on. But what I'm trying to say is there were all of these traumatic events for the women on my mother's side of the family. Some of them were due to color thing, the color determinant, or, yeah, colorism. And then other things were probably just the place, the circumstances, the times, the sense of identity. I mean, how do you feel proud when you never learn your history? I mean, you might learn your personal history. You never learn your language. I mean, the language was taken, the culture was taken, the sense of history was taken, all in this transatlantic passage. Have I talked too long? No, you can wrap it. Okay, please let me know. So when I was thinking about all of this, and with my daughter, I have 2 daughters, it made me begin to wonder about myself and the choices or the conditions that were at play in my own life. I married a civil rights worker who happened to be white in Alabama. We met in Alabama. We were both going to school on the East Coast. And his father was so hostile to our getting married that we had to have a guard at our wedding because he was coming. Said he was going to come and kill us. And he had also, before we got married, threatened to have him put in a mental institution. So after we lived in France, I had this fellowship, this Fulbright. We went to Berkeley, and then Berkeley, of course, was the time of the 60s and the Black Panther Party, and I happened to know someone. It was my first contact when I got there, and it was very political, but then I was married to a white man, and then there was a Black Power movement, and then there was all the conflict and the, so we decided to come to Hawaii. He got a job at ELNE school. I started teaching at a place called Hawaii Loa at the time. Now it's Hawaii Pacific. And we started our life here. And it was pretty smooth until I got divorced, or we got divorced. But, we're friends. We were friends. And then I married a local Okinawan Japanese guy. And we're quite different. But in terms of availability of Black men here in the islands, oh, by the way, my research at the university was the history of Blacks in Hawaii, so we won't even go there. But that's very complex in itself. So it has made me, I guess you could say, feel like an outsider. I've always been an outsider, and I think to be a writer and a successful writer, and maybe even an artist, you have to be an outsider and be the observer. And so I live in beautiful Ka'awa between the mountains and the sea. I'm greatly influenced by nature, which is my peace and my temple. And I write. And I find my inner joy, and I am ever so grateful to be in this place and with the people I have been blessed to meet and who have supported me and loved me as I them. And I think that's just such a disjointed, abbreviated, tiny bit of my life. But there has been trauma, and it has been generational. And I think that all of those women's stories have definitely influenced who I am. And I grew up thinking I was really ugly. That was another thing, that was another trauma. Number one, you're Black, you're ugly, you're inferior, all of those kinds of things. And so it's been a struggle of overcoming, truly. And I think it was when I was probably about 38 that I had a breakdown, not a nervous breakdown, but a tear breakdown, when I realized that all of my boundaries in Alabama, all the streets in Alabama led to a violent place. Every street, every highway, I could only go so far and feel safe. So there's been a lot of trauma, and I don't have that feeling here. And thank you so much. The Peace Man coming up.
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity to be here with you all and to share this beautiful stage with you all as well. So I'll start with a story. I like the stories. So I'm José Barzola. Yes, there's what my day job is, but really what I love to do is build community. And I see that I'm on the right panel because that's a lot of what we continue to do, we've been doing, we continue to do. A lot of what I love to talk about is how do we develop healthy, positive relationships. But it took a while for me to get to this space. I realized I like to reflect upon like the dominoes of life and that led me here. When I was asked to talk about generational trauma, it's actually this past summer, someone reached out to me. I'm on like all the socials. It was via Instagram, asking me to. It was a speaker. I would love to give a talk. You can moderate on intergenerational trauma in Asian American Pacific Islander community. And from there, it's been one conversation after another, and here I am today. Healing is the other word that keeps coming up for me this year. So I guess it's a year of generational trauma, but then the healing that comes along with it. So to go a little further back, so I'm originally from Peru. At a very young age, immigrated to the Northeast in Connecticut. But even before that immigration, just understanding the family and the ancestors, and especially since I've been here in Hawaii, I've had there's been an opportunity for me to kind of take a pause, reflect upon my heritage. There's the Quechua indigenous to Peru. There's the Spaniard colonizers. Then there's also the Italian, the Chinese. Just about a week ago, I was in conversation with someone, and we did the math, and I am fourth-generation Japanese as well. So just once more, going back to that identity piece, connecting with the identity. And my journey has been one of that specifically. When I studied, the work that I do, it's all interconnected. I think that's really at the core of it all. But even, yes, I was born in Peru, but understanding that, or for folks who may not know, it's a very large country. My grandparents actually came from the mountains, so which not much work is out there, so they had to go to the city for work. So that in itself is a migration in itself, having to leave family behind, having to learn new ways, having to adapt, pivot. And so it's been, something that generationally has, moved along. Yes, have ancestors from Japan and China and Italy. And so I can only, have heard light stories here or there, but once more displacement, more mental health, more the taboo of not being able to get those resources. I will say I'm forever thankful for family and, the opportunity to migrate to the United States, and just because similar to Meleanna, you know, it was never if you go to school or college. It's you're going to college, figure it out, and finding those opportunities. You know, from growing up in the inner city, where it's like, oh no, there's better education in suburbia, so we're moving to suburbia. We'll figure it out. To understanding that, like, oh, I'm the token in this school. There's nobody else that looks like me. And it actually wasn't something that I realized till much later. I realized how important it is to have the modeling, the role models out there. So a big portion of my experience has always been, I move into a space, I observe, and then I slowly figure out how to navigate the space. And partially just because it's, you know, so yeah, that was from middle school to high school, and then going to university once more, you know, being a token. They have cultural centers there to make where all the people of color can kind of congregate, basically. And it wasn't something that I knew about until in like my junior year, I discovered it. And I was like, oh, there's people here who practice similar traditions, you know, like you go into a room, you have to greet everyone. It's not just like, hey, how's it going? All right, the awkwardness of it all. So there's a, but you find role models along the way. And I, you know, studied as a Spanish major, anthropology, Latino studies. Once more, identity, trying to figure out who I am. So part of the healing process has been this journey to, you know, understand myself, and also finding some really good role models and realizing, oh, I can get a degree and continue to work in higher education and kind of give back to folks who don't know the right answers to ask. For a while, I was an academic advisor. My philosophy has always been provide more information to students than what they're asking, because I think folks sometimes just don't really know what questions to ask. And so it's been a lot of the, like, you know, an official caretaker, try and provide those brave spaces for folks to grow. Also just being in community, being, you know, doesn't necessarily mean that I was searching out for other Latinos or other Peruvians. Just a big portion of my journey has been exploring ways to build bridges, figuring out ways to collaborate, understanding that we shouldn't just be coming together when something bad happens. You know, we should be doing this more often. It takes a village to do everything, and it's important to build on that village and be inclusive of it and provide spaces for folks to thrive. And so even today, you know, so yeah, I was in Connecticut, I was in Massachusetts for a bit, New York, and then ended up here about 9.5 years ago or so. Once more, just observing, taking step by step. I never thought I'd go into this like peace building field. It was just one of those things that when it came up, I was like, oh yeah, makes sense. And I think what I love about it is that, and what I try to encourage folks to think about is, you know, how can we shift our perspective? And you all here are peace builders in your own right. It's just a matter of understanding what are you doing to build those beautiful relationships with your community? You know, what is the kindness that you display, whether it's opening a door, whether it's dropping off some food for someone who's not doing well, letting someone pass when you're driving. You know, we're all in it together. And I think it's just a matter of letting folks in on that conversation. That's part of the healing process for me, having these larger conversations. I started these virtual talk stories about 4 years ago during the pandemic, and it's been a beautiful way to also just learn about communities here, near, and very far away, providing a space for there are cultural talk stories about indigenous communities around the world. And the more I have more conversations with folks, I realize, yes, we have lots of beautiful things that make us unique, but if we actually start talking to each other, we might figure out we have a lot more in common than we realize. And so yeah, that's part of the healing process, is providing space for those dialogues. And the part that people don't really like to hear many times is like, it takes time. It takes time. You need to devote we're in a rushing world here where we want to figure out what's the Band-Aid, how to fix things really quickly, but it takes time just to listen to people, I love all the stories that have been shared here. I actually spent some time in Montgomery, Alabama in October 2019, so yeah, every one of those streets has a story. There's a plaque everywhere. I've never been to a place that has so many plaques. Yes, I went to that, yes. Yes, if you're spiritual, it's very. Yeah, what I loved about my trip there was we actually did after we visited, we came together as our group, and we had some facilitators that guided us to be able to process the emotions and what we experienced, which I think, once more, providing that space for time and discussion and healing, which, how many times has you've gone to a museum and you're just like, all right, let's do lunch. And maybe you don't even talk about what you just experienced. So just think about those shared experiences that you're having with folks and make sure to, have further conversation about them. Especially, we have a lot of missed opportunities. But yeah, well, I'm getting I think, no.
Are you Paul?
Yeah, I think I can be POW for now. I imagine there'll be some questions.
Yes,
Thank
and
you,
before
thank you.
we go to questions, thank you, Jose, very much. And I just want to mention, when you think about generational trauma with immigration, put that in the context of war, because many people are refugees from war and have to go through these kinds of adaptations that just is so difficult. Mr. Sean, would you please go to the second to the last slide? As I said earlier, you can heal from generational trauma. It is possible. And we're going to have a slide up. When it comes up over here, let me know, because I can't see it. How to heal from generational trauma. And all of this will be on the Interfaith Alliance of Hawaii website. Is it there? Yes. Okay. So here's 6 ways to heal. Take a look at that, because I want to leave time for questions for the audience. On the next, there we go. This is how you heal from generational trauma. All very doable. I think, Jose, you were talking about a lot of this in your own experience. And this is what we all have to do to find the healing. So has everyone seen that? I'll move on to the next slide. This is also how you heal from historical trauma. Jose, you mentioned some of this. Connect with people who are strong in your culture. Find support. Grieve over the losses you've experienced, because that's what trauma is. Loss and impact. Acknowledge your feelings and experiences. Talk to other people. If you need to talk to professionals, do so. Just talk about it. Don't hold it all in. So now I would like to open the floor to questions of all 4 speakers. Cynthia, did you have a question?
So this has been wonderful, and thank you very much for your comments. So a couple of things. I went to UMass Boston, and we went to Peru for our spring break, but was a working thing for our final papers for humanities. And so we stayed in fincas. We didn't stay in hotels. Paulo Freire talks about coming from oppression, and in your transition of coming out of oppression, your first example is to become the oppressor. And then he goes on to talk about other things. Tom and I lived in Mexico, in San Miguel de Allende, in Guanajuato, which is probably the most conservative state in Mexico. And there are a number of indigenous communities there, Otomi, Chichimeca, Toltec. And in befriending and talking to some of them, they talked about masking, and that you would never know the real person because they had a mask for every person or type of person that they had to interact with. So I'd like to hear your comments about masking in your own personal life or in your healing in talking to other people.
Well, they decide who's going to answer that, or all of them. Who else has a question?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that one. So we tend to that's code switching nowadays. But yeah, it can be masking because, sometimes I refer to that as code switching, and a lot of it comes down to the way I dress. You know, we had a conversation about microaggressions last week, one of the events I was doing, and how much of our society influences the way that we showcase ourselves. You know, one example I give is, you know, growing up, we would have those like sweaters that from Peru made out of like llamas, and which are like these beautiful, you know, woven sweaters that you would nowadays you get at like a fancy store for hundreds of dollars, but we would just have it because that's what we grew up with. But kids can be mean, and they're bullies. And so I at some point just decided like, oh, I'll just wear a hoodie, you know. So how do we change our personas? And there is different ways that I will speak, you know, in the workplace here. But I will say, as time goes on, some of that masking, you kind of shed those masks and those layers, because I find that, you know, you realize, what's the point? You know, it's like, this is me, and I'm hoping that folks they either accept me for me or, well, you know, in time, we'll find. But yeah, I don't know. I wonder if other folks want to jump in on this.
I think that for masking, there's been a lot of masking in the Black community. Obsequious behavior, so as not to threaten people that thought that you had a certain place. Laughter as a buffer, or smiling is kind of a mask thing. Dressing up to counter the idea that you can't afford to, or you'll be looked down upon. My mother would never let me go barefoot or be dirty, or, you know, any of those kinds of things, because it was the mask. She wanted me to have the mask to be more acceptable. So yeah, I think there's been a lot of masking in the Black community. Today I'm kind of masked. I dressed up. I'm not in my tawdry garden clothes, but anyway.
Pretty similar. Girls wore dresses, guys wore slacks and shirts. So, and girls wore jewelry, and that was basically something that the Filipino women would be dressed up, dolled up, and as a kid growing up, as soon as I got slacks on, they stayed on. So I guess I was a perfect candidate to be a prison worker. So, you know, the masking for me, you know, kind of denying how I grew up, and then just wearing what I wanted to wear, what I felt comfortable in. And it goes on and on, I guess, as we evolve or just kind of do what makes us feel comfortable with ourselves.
And just quickly, all of us wear masks. I'm absolutely positive of that, whether we're in theater or not. And I think for my mother, she was orphaned very young, so she was raised by a bunch of Belgian nuns. They're the cutest little nuns in the whole wide world, but she thought she was white. So my mom, you know, those are other issues on the subject of masking, because those were her role models. So I think, you know, endemic, you know, etic, whatever, those things are there, whether we see them or not. And yet the DNA part, the generational trauma, is something that just does continue until you're able to either recognize it, read about yourself or it, and just realize that we have to, each of us, do our own good work. So then the masking can be put down. But I'm absolutely positive all of us go through that kind of experience. At least that's from my personal experience. I think there's a question in the back.
Yes, thank you. Good evening. I'm Joanne Tachibana, and I'm delighted with the topic here. Hello, Pete. Thank you for the invitation also. But we belong to the Interfaith. But I hope that a future trauma one would include the Japanese American trauma generational, because that's, of course, my third generation, and my parents were traumatized because of the war, and their parents were immigrants, right? So I'm hoping that this dialogue continues, because just understanding where you're all coming from has been such a valuable wake-up call too. But masking, we grew up like we had a very violent family, but nobody knew because we studied hard, we went to school, we were A students, me and my sister, but at home, we were threatened to die any day of the, but that's all masking. That's a code of silence that we grew up in. So I look forward to a future conversation. Thank you.
Let me ask a question of the audience. If we did another one of these, would you tell a friend and come again if we had different panelists?
Tadia, could you wait just a minute? We're live streaming. They can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. If this was interesting to you and valuable to you, and we can only do 3 to 4 panelists at a time, would you come again if we did generational trauma with different ethnic groups and different subjects? That's a good response. Okay. Thank you. We will do so. Now, does anyone else use? There's a question in the back there, and also Marie Ann.
Allison, hi.
Hi. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. This question is for Estela and Meleanna. Estela, kawaii girl, mini hoonies, yay. Generational trauma has obviously been around and maybe something very known in mental health communities, but it's only been relatively recently, I think, that it's become much more, not common knowledge, but there's been more of an awareness. And in the incarceration community, there's a higher percentage of Native Hawaiians, is what I understand. So my question is that being addressed, the generational trauma that they have experienced, from not the annexation or even from Captain Cook, that whole tragedy?
Ooh, good question. I can also just say that there are women's groups now that are doing really progressive, extraordinary things. Things that 5 years ago weren't happening. Linda Lingle's leading a women prison group in terms of government regulations and getting education into the prisons. And Tadia and I are on that with a whole number of others. Lots of education, and things are turning slowly. It's a large system. And let's just face it, most of these systems, all of them really need an overhaul, and they were not really set up for people to succeed. We were just asked to, all of us somehow, toe the line, be good little worker bees, and don't ask questions, and God forbid you should be curious. So we're doing the work now, all of us. Those of you in the room, I'm sure you're feeling feeling that change is happening. But I'm going to let Estela talk about what's also going on, except she just retired.
Thank you for that question. It is needed, and then the cool part about teaching corrections is I learn things backwards, right? And women in corrections or women, or incarcerated women, are the forgotten prisoners because there's such a small population that a lot of funding goes to the males. But now there's a shift because of it's a needed thing. You know, women, incarcerated women cause trauma for the family because they're the caregivers. So when you lock up the caregiver, who takes care of the household and the children, right? So to address that, we do have psychologists, but what's needed is more of a local for Hawaii, because what I find beautifully in the Hawaii prison is that the inmates here retain a lot of their culture. When they go to the mainland, they kind of lose a lot of that because they have to assimilate. But here, they're more open to talk story, and they're more open to share their stories. And the groups that we've had, Tadia was gonna be on part of our volunteer group, but I retired, so the push. But we do have other group-led classes by Pua Foundation, and also other groups that come in, and the counselors also do healing groups. So when I sit through those healing groups, it's nice to hear their stories and how they openly learn how to journal, how to do simple things so that they can forgive themselves and become the mother when they're released and the person they want to be when they're released. So it gives me some hope that we are addressing the need that we have to recognize there are females that are incarcerated and they have unique issues and concerns that we need to address, or the cycle is just going to keep bringing them back. And I always say as a warden, the vacancy sign stays up, but we don't need you here. And that's what I tell them every time I graduate a class. I was like, you know what? There's always room for you, but we don't need you here. We need you out there. So thank you for that question.
Oh, hi. Hi. This was going back one, because just this morning, I know you can't see it, but I saw this post in a grief group that I belong to, and it's just somehow hit me really hard. And in hearing you talk about masking, it's this guy smiling, if you can see that, and all it says is, it's scary what a smile can hide. We all mask.
Let's see, there's some back here. There, here. I don't know.
Oh, thank you. Sorry. Oh, hi. My name's Estela. And I have a question for any of the panelists. It's in regards to resisting whiteness in the workplace or the field that you work in. Workplaces and institutions in this country call us to model behaviors and attributes different from our own as people of color. And so if we want to succeed and be accepted in the workplace, we practice professionalism through a set of standards by which we are measured. And that standard is often whiteness. So as you have each grown in your own respectable field, how have you resisted that?
I'll do that. I started my prison journey in Allenwood, Pennsylvania. So I was basically one of 2 Asian Pacific Islanders. So I headed that program for the prison to bring more awareness and to see what they were interested in learning about Hawaii, or what we came from, who we are. And the interesting thing was fishing was big in Pennsylvania. So back then was let's go fishing. I remember I brought VHS was big back then, so that I'm dating myself. So I used to bring back recordings of let's go fishing stories, and then the names of the fishes, the Hawaiian names of the fishes. And it was interesting to them. And I was like, wow, this is kind of cool. So just kind of educating people and being in the front of it, although I was voluntold to head these programs, for me, it was like, okay, if it's kind of cool, you want to learn about where I came from or what we are. And I think just doing that creates more acceptance and kind of allows them to ask you the questions. So for me, I had to step out of that shell because, I was kind of quiet back then from Kauai. You don't say nothing, you kind of head down and keep going, right? So for me, it was a growth thing. So it was a positive thing for me also.
It's a great question. And look at this face. This is a Hawaiian-looking face to you. So it goes both ways. I've been in Hawaiian communities, born and raised where my family is from in Hilo, and asked, hey, we never invite one haole, So it's hard because if you're going to be judged by the look and the skin color of your skin, mina in Hawaiian, right? And I just want you to know that that might be a dominant thing, whiteness in that context, but here everyone's a minority. So I find that refreshing. And I also tend to build alliances with like minds and like morals and values so that there are one or two of us who can stand together. And if that doesn't work in terms of your essence, you got to find work and purpose that feels good to you. So if it doesn't align with your worldview, just keep looking for places and people, and you'll find them. But you got to ask the universe, because we're in a church. But I just want to say, universe is so good, nature is so good. There's so many ways to ask, and your kupuna, your elders, will respond, because that's what I believe. And with the crazy projects that I've gotten myself into, let me tell you, I work them overtime. So just go to them and do that work that you love versus, being in a situation perhaps where, you have to toe somebody else's line, because you're talking to an artist. So we're not real followers per se, we're not sheep. But anyway, I'm hoping that helped.
I was working in an institution at the university, and most of my students had never had a black teacher. And I'd say this is back in the 70s and 80s and 90s and early 2000s, and most of them had maybe only been in a class with one or two other black students. And so it was a whole nother ball game. I tried to create or to share knowledge that would be relative to human experiences, and yet at the same time share the uniqueness. I felt very lonely at the university because there were hardly any black faculty, maybe 3 across the whole campus. Now maybe there are 8 or 10 at UH Manoa. So it's still kind of a lonely place. But my thing is the humanness of us all and what everyone has been talking about, building community. And so just to do the best that I could in those circumstances, I did speak out, and I was not favored for that. I was known for speaking out, saying we need more African Americans on campus because it doesn't feel like a community here in terms of individual relations. But yeah, just to be as professional as I could, that was my task.
One way that I go about this, I introduced myself earlier. I try to go with José Barzola, the original pronunciation of it. I never know who's in the audience, but normally tend to spark a conversation later on where maybe somebody out there might go along and actually share the real pronunciation of their name as it was given, as opposed to the anglicized format. So there's little things that we can do, you know, that brings comfort and brings also your heritage with you along the process. So, and I don't think that's so much like, you know, creating civil disobedience or anything along those lines. I add an accent to my name because that's what it has. I try to make sure, you know, I sign it off, and it actually leads to interesting conversations when people email me back and they're like, I'm so sorry, I have no idea how to put this accent on your name. I tried copying and pasting it, and so it just leads to further, you know, that consideration, that caring and kindness of folks. So little things like that, you know, that I think can go a long way. So yeah, just I think, and I think we are really blessed to be in this space here in Hawaii where we can have those further conversations. So yeah, I'd say just make time for it. That's really what it is. But yeah, similarly at the university, I don't think it was until maybe about a year ago that I finally I'm in a room with another José and we happen to be sitting next to each other. Like most of the times I fulfill someone's life goal of meeting José. And because they're always like, oh, you know José? Yes, I know José. And it's like, I'm the only José they're talking about. But yeah, also when I was in New York, looking at, you know, was working with first generation underrepresented students, and the only other Josés were in the janitorial staff. I was the only person that spoke Spanish, and that's the major language of our students in a whole division. You know, admissions would come over and ask me to help them out when parents would show up who only spoke Spanish, so I can like talk to them about the college that we were at. So, you know, there's lots of spaces where I've found myself where it's like, oh, it's you know, it's an opportunity to shine and showcase who you really are. So just, you know, look for those opportunities, I think.
We have one back here, we have one up here, and we have one up here. Okay.
Mahalo. Aloha. My name is Lucana Hernandez. Mucho gusto, José. Hawaiian values of aloha, of ohana, of ho'oponopono, making things right. Earlier, you spoke about the system, and I'm seeing a need to create a new way, a land-based, aina-based treatment, aina-based focus, where we help one another to forgive, to connect with the aina, to connect with ourselves, our bodies, which we've disconnected from, our hearts. And these values are universal. They're not just Hawaiian. And Hawaii as a piko for healing, as an opportunity. How can we support aina-based programs, aloha-based programs for all staff as well as those in need? Mahalo.
Oh my goodness, I want to let you know great things are happening. There are so many great programs. I was with my sister, and it's Aha Aina, Pono Aina. There are so many. Please support Beloved Ma'o Farms. They just were given acreage out in Makaha. So, you know, all of these programs need funding, need extra support, need us to talk about them to our representatives, and those letters make a difference, phone calls make a difference, and volunteering. I mean, I can't tell you how many INA-based programs there are going on in the charter schools. Because that is a principle that is so important. We honor her as mother, and she is sentient, and that is it, you know. And so this is really coming into the fore. I'm so glad you brought that up, because we want to heal, we have to connect with the land. And then if she forgives us for everything that has happened to her, then we will heal even more, because, you know, there's some really great things. I just wanted to reiterate that. All you got to do is Aina Aloha. There's a summit this Thursday called PO, and all of these things are Aina-based. So up at the university and in the community. Good question. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one here, and we have one there. You had your hand up.
Okay, thanks. Aloha, if I may, just put two questions on the table, because I don't expect both of them to be addressed. First question was, takeaway I got from generational healing was it's a process of self-knowledge, collective knowledge. My question is if there's any advice or mana'o in supporting generational trauma in keiki. Keiki that, you know, long historical narratives may not be appropriate, you know, but, you know, processing feelings that they don't have words for. So if happen to have experience with that, I welcome any mana'o, any advice. The other question I have was kind of a visioning question. You know, these days it's kind of trendy or popular, the idea of being trauma-informed. So we get trauma-informed healthcare, trauma-informed poetry, trauma-informed correctionals, right? Trauma-informed this and that. My question is this: do you think there's any areas that we have not explored or have not really been pushed to be trauma-informed, and what that field might look like if it was trauma-informed? You know, these other things outside of the ones we've been talking about, healthcare, but other, you know, parts of life, whether it's political or otherwise. I don't know, it's just kind of a visioning question, what that might look like. But those two questions on the table. Mahalo.
Pass it along. So one thing I learned at an early age was to provide a voice. So as far as youth, I was provided the opportunity to speak at a young age when the elders were speaking, even though some elders may have not wanted that. But I had support from other folks. And so I would say provide that space for young keiki to be able to share their voice. Just, you know, have those open-ended questions, provide that time to listen to them. I think I just from my own kids, like, I continue to learn and realize that as adults, we make things a lot more complicated than they tend to be. My 3-year-old is at the why stage. And so when she keeps asking me why, I realize, oh, I'm not explaining it well. Your other question, what was the other question? About, just trauma. One area of trauma that I yet to hear anyone talk about is COVID. We went through a global pandemic together, and no one wants to talk about it. We just rush to business as usual. We're here meeting in public, in person. We've all, you know, talk about like something collective that could unite folks, unite a world. And we went back to, unfortunately, our old ways, our old divisive ways. And I think there's so much that, it's such a missed opportunity for a shared experience to learn from that, from each other, to have further conversations about that. That's one that I've yet to find folks talk about.
Just briefly for the children, I always took my children to events to, whether it was to seminars or programs or rallies or whatever, I would always take them. And even if they could not absorb everything, they got something. And it was a group that they were, rather than putting them in the daycare or putting them over here, there, or the other. And then the other thing about trauma, well, I'll just pass.
Thank you for that about COVID. We'll do one on COVID. That's the trauma of COVID. You're very, very right. I just wanted to say one thing about children. We don't know what every child is experiencing, who we meet, wherever they are, even our own, our nieces, nephews. One thing that is critical is whenever you meet a child, passing them in the grocery store, wherever, they're screaming, they're hollering, they're in the basket having a fit. If you have an opportunity to tell any child that you happen to interact with, you are so beautiful. I can see you are so smart. Oh, how wonderful. I wish I had a little boy or girl just like you. You don't know what they're going through at home. Believe me, it's problematic. Unfortunately, the newer generations, the younger generations, are not taught the psychology of children. They're not taught how to raise a child. We weren't. Why do we think they would be? So just laud that child, because if they hear nobody else's voice in their lifetime, they may remember that a perfect stranger saw the light in them. It costs you nothing. So simple. Ed, did you have a question?
Well, Ed does, yes.
Aloha, Ed Young, and I just want to thank the panelists. Excellent. I wanted to say that for the next topic of the next session, health. I was going to a Blacks in Government convention in Tampa. I got to Tampa, but I had to leave because my foster son passed away. But the session I really wanted to be there was African American men's health, why they resist going to the doctor. See, and so, and I had a first cousin who didn't say anything until the very last days. He had colon cancer. Didn't say anything until finally it was so bad that he didn't last. But he didn't say it to his own wife, to his own daughter. And so we have trauma that comes from the decisions or the holding back and of course mistrust of doctors, you see. So hopefully that'll be the next one because it's a huge topic. Mahalo.
Time for more questions? I know there's one here.
I just wanted to remind you, Ed, that it's across all cultures, men. If anything I can offer in terms of an equality, because Hawaiians actually do that really poorly as well, but we have aspirations of understanding our completeness with Hina and Ku in terms of energies, the masculine and the feminine and the intermediary. So what we're trying to get at is all of that, not only trauma, but the bravado and the machismo, and it's prevalent in all of our cultures because men, it's hyper-masculinized in capitalist culture, and what it is, let's just face it. Anyway, there's so much more conversation for that one. We'll leave that one alone.
I think I have 2 cents rather than a question. Thank you so much for being here. It's wonderful. Listening to all of you, I was born and raised here. My dad's family came from Germany around the Horn in 1883, so my grandmother was actually born on Kauai. But my dad met my mother in Chicago. She's from the South, so I've got all this Southern stuff that I have inherited, if you will, plus my German background, which means, oh my God, World War I, World War II. My dad, when he found out he was part German, he just didn't know what to do with that. So, and then the other thing that came to me was when I left here and I went to the Midwest, the Chicago area, to school, to college, I was local. And I would say, oh, hi. And they'd look at me like, oh my God, I haven't been introduced to you yet, or something like that. I don't know what it was. But I would say hello or goodbye to people getting off the elevator, and they would look at me like I was a strange creature. And so that was traumatic. And I did the hula, so I guess I fit in as hula Hannah or something. But it's like, it's every place. It's every place. It isn't just black or white or Oriental. You know, World War II, my dad was a Pearl Harbor survivor, and his nurse was from Japan, and she was in tears because she said, I'm so sorry, I don't know what to do. I love that woman. So it's universal. It's not just, and kids can learn this from the time they're very, very, very small. And yeah, it's wonderful. So we start with the children. Thank you.
Chip.
I like this gentleman's comment over here earlier about, are there other areas we could be looking at to have this kind of dialogue? And it just struck me, Joanne, as you started to speak, we, I think, are overlooking an opportunity with our culture, and I'm going to say young children that are carrying these games of war in their hands and a telephone. And I think we could have a dialogue around that for the next 50 years. I'm reminded of one of our people here in the church, Steve Okino, who's been involved in your work, actually, who introduced to our men's group the whole concept of compassionate, what's it called? Nonviolent, compassionate communication. Well, that too, but it was really, no, it's a one-page statement by like more than 80 religions that met for a year. Say it again? Oh, anyway, Steve introduced us to that, and I reminded him of it the other day after the election period, that it might be a good place to go back to because it really speaks to all religions around the earth to be more compassionate, to treat our children a certain way, to give them guidelines that really can raise them into a whole nother level of leadership wherever they are, whether it's here in the islands or in the Marshall Islands or wherever, you know. So I think we have an opportunity to maybe have a dialogue about that whole approach.
Thank you. Your suggestions are wonderful, and we will take them back as we develop 2025. Every other month, we will have a panel similar to this. I'm not sure where, but I am so grateful to Unity Church tonight and Reverend Tim for allowing us to use this venue. Thank you. And I want to thank our panelists, all brilliant, remarkable people. We will try and keep this up. I think we have some food left so that when we close, you can finish whatever there is. And in the meantime, I think Reverend Tim has something to say. And we thank you very much on behalf of the Interfaith Alliance of Hawaii.
Thank you. Thank you. And on the table out here, there is a bowl. If any of you wish to, if you can, if you can afford it, if you wish to help support some of the costs of this meeting tonight, you can just place your gift in the bowl out there. It's been an honor. Thank you all. It's been an honor. And thank you all. And thanks to those of you who are watching online, because we want to truly build a world that works for everybody. Thank you and have a wonderful evening. And again, there's still some refreshments down the steps and into that building over there. All right. Mahalo.